Get in the game with the college-branded Venmo debit card. Wreck your team with every tap and earn up to 5% cash back with Venmo Stash, a new rewards program from Venmo. No monthly fee, no minimum balance, just school pride and spending power. Get in the game and sign up for the Venmo debit card at venmo.com/collegecard. The Venmo MasterCard is issued by the Bancorp Bank N.A. Select schools available. Venmo Stash terms and exclusions apply at venmo.me/stash terms. Max $100 cash back per month.
This is Under the Dome. It's the week of June 6, 2022, and on today's episode, reporters Avi Bajpai and Will Doran explain what's next for three big bills the North Carolina Senate just passed.
For the News and Observer, I'm Avi Bajpai, your host of this week's episode of Under the Dome. It was a busy week at the North Carolina General Assembly last week, particularly in the state Senate, where lawmakers passed three major bills over the span of just 2 days. The votes to expand Medicaid insurance coverage to around 500,000 people, legalize medical marijuana to treat certain ailments, and ban elementary school teachers from teaching K through 3 students about LGBTQ issues were significant steps for the Senate. And now they've teed up major decisions in the House in terms of what should be passed and sent to Governor Roy Cooper's desk and what should not. Joining us on today's episode to help break down all of the action in the Senate last week is my colleague, Will Doran. Will, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Avi. Happy to talk about it.
Yeah, it's like I was saying, it was a busy week. We were both down there at the legislature. I think we should start with the most bipartisan vote last week. That was expanding Medicaid coverage. So I wanted to ask you, you've been writing about this for a long time. I wanted to ask you, how significant is it that nearly all Democrats and Republicans in the Senate came together to pass Medicaid expansion?
Oh, it was hugely significant. I mean, we didn't have a state budget for multiple years because the Democrats and the Republicans couldn't agree on Medicaid expansion, and the Democrats decided to make it, such a big sticking point, and the Republicans just decided to not bend at all on that. So we went for years without, funding extra raises for teachers or funding new, road construction projects or all the other things that you would normally do in a budget because of a fight over Medicaid expansion. And now it gets put up for a vote and passes. The first vote was 44-2, and the second vote was 44-1, because one of the people who voted against it the first time didn't show up for the second vote. It was this nearly unanimous, just overwhelming support for it, and it was just would really, I think, shock people if we, traveled back in time just a couple of years and told them that this had happened. I'm not sure if anyone would believe us. Part of the reason why it was so bipartisan is because it's not just Medicaid expansion. It has several things in addition to Medicaid expansion in the bill that have been longtime goals for conservatives, really kind of on the regulatory reform side. There's some things towards certificate of need, which is a very esoteric law regarding hospitals and competition that I won't go into a ton here, but we've written about that in the past before. If that is something that you're curious about, you can Google certificate of need North Carolina, and I'm sure you'll find plenty of coverage about it. But there's reforms to that. There's reforms to nursing rules, telehealth stuff, really some stuff that hospitals and doctors have lobbied against and killed in the past, but that Republicans think that they can get passed into law this time by attaching it to Medicaid.
So it's passed the Senate, like you were saying, 44-1, the final vote. What does that lopsided margin, what does that mean for the bill's ability to pass the House, basically overcome opposition in the House, be considered for a vote in the House? And particularly, I want to bring up this point of, senior GOP figures in the Senate, senators like Ralph Heiss, and then, of course, Leader Phil Berger, taking time during the floor discussion of the bill this week to, talk at length about how they came around to supporting this. What does this all mean to you? How do you interpret this for the bill's prospects in the House?
Well, we are probably only going to be, when I say we, I mean everyone at the legislature, probably only going to be around a couple more weeks, maybe just really through the end of June. It's looking like everyone wants to get out of there pretty early this summer. So anything that's going to happen in the House has to happen fast. House Speaker Tim Moore has been pretty clear that he's not super interested in moving on Medicaid expansion this year. He said he's got bigger priorities, like dealing with the state budget. The state actually collected, we already have a state budget for this year, but we collected around $6.5 billion more than we expected. So that's some extra money that they can figure out how to do something with, or if they don't figure something out, then it just kind of sits around because, goes into the rainy day fund. But Moore would like to try to work with the Senate to figure out some way to spend all that money. Whether it's on tax cuts or further capital projects or whatever. So we'll see if the Senate tries to play a little bit of hardball and not really play ball with him on the budget unless Medicaid expansion goes through. That's kind of one of those sort of insider baseball things that everyone is going to be watching down there, from members of the legislature to lobbyists to journalists to just members of the public who, are invested in these things. And I think that kind of gets at what you were just talking about with top senators like Senator Berger and Senator Heiss, really, not just saying, okay, I support this, let's pass it on, but really giving lengthy, extended speeches laying out multiple reasons why they think this is a good deal. Senator Berger ended his speech saying that the fight has just begun on this, and that, he is going to work on House members to try to put some pressure on the House to pass this. And he asked all of the other senators to do the same. And that is not something that you really hear said in public ever over at the building, I was sitting next to Travis Fain, who's a WRL reporter, when it happened. He looked at me, he's like, wow, like they're going to the mat for this. And, I think Travis hit the nail on the head with that. Like, Senator Berger is going to go to the mat for Medicaid, it seems, which, he said himself, he's been probably the strongest opponent of it in North Carolina for years. But things have changed, and he's decided that it's not as risky of a decision as he once thought it was. And so he thinks it's the best decision to do right now.
So let's turn to the next bill that we have here, next major bill that passed the Senate again this week, or last week, I should say. And that's this Republican-led effort. This has been something that both parties have their various bills on and policies and stances on, but this is a GOP-led effort to legalize medical marijuana. I'm wondering, is it surprising for you to see this bill quickly put on the calendar for the Rules Committee and then passed out of the Senate after not really having any progress on it for several months?
Yeah, this has been a really interesting bill. It was filed over a year ago, kind of spring of 2021, by Senator Bill Rabon, who is one of the most powerful people at the legislature. He's chairman of the Rules Committee, which is the most influential committee over there. It basically decides, what bills are going to get a vote or not. And so, to have him sponsoring it was a huge deal. It flew through a ton of other committees in 2021, but as soon as it hit his own committee, which was the final step and where it was basically guaranteed to pass, it never came up. And so, that obviously led to tons of speculation about what was going on. They weren't really saying, but, clearly something was, holding it up, whether it was, lobbying pressure behind the scenes or troubles with getting the GOP caucus on board. It was never really a question that the bill would pass, because we always knew that at least a few Republicans would vote for it and basically every Democrat would vote for it. But there's kind of an unspoken rule at times that you don't put bills up unless they have not just a majority of support, but a majority of the majority party. And so, it could be that they just needed a few months to convince enough fellow Republicans to get on board. And what Senator Rabin has said the whole time, and what he continued to reiterate last Thursday, was that he wants this bill to be very strict. And so that has, not really made some marijuana advocates very happy. And some Democratic senators, too, have tried to loosen some of the restrictions, make it a little bit more liberal. Those suggestions have all been shot down, really to make sure that, enough Republicans were going to remain on board with it. You kind of have this balancing match of like, okay, we're going to, approve this, but it's going to be very limited in what it can apply to. There's around 15 different things. Cancer, PTSD are kind of the main two, but Crohn's disease, sickle cell anemia are on the list. Things that aren't on the list that some other states have done are glaucoma, chronic pain, to be used to treat opioid addiction. Some of the Republicans were a little scared that those issues were a little too vague, could be almost a loophole to make it more just kind of like de facto recreational legalization, which they really did not want to do. And so they have passed what they think is a very strict version of medical marijuana, but it is medical marijuana. Again, if we could talk to our time traveling selves from a couple of years ago and tell them that, on the same day the Senate voted for both marijuana and Medicaid expansion, I think even a lot of the people who just voted for those two things would think that we're crazy.
Yeah, it's a huge development. So I want to ask you, before we move on to our last bill that we're going to be talking about today, kind of a similar question. The bill passed, I believe it was 35-10 was the final vote count. So some bipartisan opposition, but obviously bipartisan support for it. What does that say to you for its prospects in the House?
Well, it says a couple things. It says, one, the Senate is paying attention to polling. I mean, if you look at public opinion polls, for years, medical marijuana has been getting, 60, 70, sometimes even 80% support from the general public. It's the vast majority of people want this. The majority of Republicans want it. The majority of Democrats want it. The majority of white people, black people, really every way that you can slice the demographics of both the nation and the state, specifically here in North Carolina, large majorities of people support medical marijuana. Support for full legalization is not as high, which is why Republicans did not want to kind of loosen some of the rules and put things in like glaucoma or chronic pain that sometimes, people sort of make fun of in other states, people faking to go get marijuana. I should be clear. There is still majority support for recreational marijuana, but it's more like, like 51, 52%, not 75, 80%. So now, does that matter as much to the House? We'll see. This is politics, obviously, and a lot of the House seats are pretty safe for Republicans. The Senate has a few more kind of competitive seats, at least percentage-wise, than the House does. So it could be that the politics, of it don't really matter quite as much to the House. But I could also definitely be proven wrong about that. So we'll just have to wait and see. 37 or 38 other states have already done this. I think everyone kind of realizes it's just a matter of time until North Carolina does it as well. And, all of the other holdout states too. And so, the question is just, do Republicans want to support it now with rules they might like, or do they want to risk in a few years if maybe, okay, we've waited a few years to support it, but all of a sudden, the rules that are getting proposed are actually a lot less strict than, what we had in 2022. That'll be one factor.
So let's move on to the last bill that was a major piece of legislation to be quickly proposed in the Senate, quickly introduced, and then passed. We're talking here about the parents, what the proponents of this bill have called the Parents' Bill of Rights. Its critics have compared it to so-called "Don't Say Gay" legislation that's propped up in the rest of the country, particularly in Florida. I'm curious what you make of this bill moving through the Senate this quickly, and now it's up for consideration in the House. This was I was covering this bill down at the legislature this week, and this is a very controversial, divisive bill. It's inspired a lot of passionate criticism, passionate concern about what the ramifications of this bill could be. Basically, I think we should break down for listeners two of the main provisions here. One of the central provisions is this bill bans, like I was saying before, between kindergarten and third grade, bans schools from teaching students about LGBTQ issues. There's also a more controversial provision, I could say, which basically says that if school records or school employees record or start using a different pronoun for a student, if a student changes their pronouns, then the school is basically under this bill required to inform parents about that. That's a very sensitive issue, and opponents of this bill, many members of the LGBTQ community, have said express a lot of concern about what could happen if that becomes law, what it could mean for LGBTQ youth in the state. Right after this bill passed the Senate, basically immediately after, there were protesters in the gallery, one floor up, who started chanting in protest to voice their opposition. Equality NC is one of the biggest LGBTQ advocacy groups in the state. They held basically sort of a press conference right after. And one thing that, I thought was interesting was I spoke with Kendra Johnson. She's the executive director of Equality NC. She was basically saying, this bill, she doesn't really think this bill is something that lawmakers necessarily want to see become law. She sees some sort of political calculations here. And I wonder, what you make of that.
Well, I don't know that they don't want it to become law, but I think it has no chance of becoming law. I mean, it passed the Senate. It will almost certainly pass the House, probably this week, maybe next week. But Roy Cooper is going to veto it. So it's kind of a foregone conclusion at this point. What's interesting about this bill, and obviously a lot of the attention, both from the general public and from lawmakers and a lot of their speeches, has focused on, the pieces of the bill, like the forced outing piece that you mentioned, and the ban on some curriculum on LGBT stuff that you mentioned. But the vast majority, it's actually a very long bill, and the vast majority of it focuses on completely different stuff. Giving parents more access to information about, their kids' schools' academic records and their kids' textbooks and other kind of teaching materials that
even some health records,
right, and health records too. Actually, some Democrats filed a bill that was also called the Parents' Bill of Rights that had some kind of similar proposals for allowing parents more access to educational records, and things like that. It was not as sweeping as the GOP bill, but kind of the theory was sort of the same. But the GOP version had also that poison pill of the LGBT issues that's just going to, obviously doom the bill. So if those hadn't been in there, who knows? Some of the pro-parent stuff with the textbooks and the academic records, that might have been something that they could have gotten bipartisan support on. But once you throw in the gay rights stuff, then obviously it's going to become just, a complete partisan divide, and you can expect the governor to veto it. So, probably of the three bills we've talked about on this episode of medical marijuana and Medicaid expansion and the Parents' Bill of Rights, I would say the Parents' Bill of Rights is the most likely to head to Roy Cooper's desk, but also, is the only one that he's definitely going to veto. He hasn't weighed in 100% on all three to say he's definitely going to sign the other two or that he's definitely going to veto this one. But based on his past support of Medicaid, I think everyone would be shocked if he did not sign that into law if it got to his desk. But that's the big question.
Yep, that's certainly what we're going to be looking out for in the coming couple of weeks. All right. Well, that does it for us for this week. To listeners, be sure to tune in next week for another episode of Under the Dome. Until then, I'm Avi Bajpai here with Will Doran from the News and Observer. Thank you for listening.
For more from our politics team, subscribe to the News and Observer at newsobserver.com/subscribe. Follow us on Twitter at Under the Dome and NC Insider, and sign up for our weekly political newsletter, also called Under the Dome, at newsobserver.com/newsletters. Thanks for listening.